All right, as always, when Parliament returns, there's a lot going on in domestic politics. But as we know, what happens at a global level in the political realm can have real consequences here. Overnight, audio has been released which has shed some light on the seizure of a British-flagged tanker by Iran's Revolutionary Guard in the Persian Gulf. The seizure has been condemned by Britain and its European allies, with the UK looking to freeze Iranian assets and push for further UN and EU sanctions on the country. The Stena Imperio is now anchored at Bandar Abbas, the main base of the Iranian Navy. Joining me tonight to discuss the implications of all of this, unravel a bit for us from a lot of news over the weekend, where to now on this issue and what's the Australian ramifications, is a retired Army General and former Senator for New South Wales, although I hope he's not going to be a former Senator for too much longer, Jim Molan. Jim, great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Peter. And I think that when you're looking at this, we spoke about this a couple of weeks ago, when you're looking at this at the moment, the developments that have occurred over the last couple of weeks are very, very concerning indeed. And I look at it from the point of view of principle, of practicalities, of big military issues and lesser military issues. The principle is freedom of navigation, and that's a responsibility not for the Americans or the Brits, it's a responsibility for the entire world. And the practicality is that we all depend on this oil that's coming out of the Gulf. Amazing amounts of oil. 20% of the world's oil comes out of the Gulf and 30% of the LNG comes out of the Gulf. We in Australia depend on it particularly. The big military issue is to do with Iran gaining the ability to make a nuclear weapon, and they could have a nuclear weapon within 12 months. The smaller ones, of course, which is driving the Americans as much as the nuclear issue, is the export of terrorism through Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Gaza and Yemen by Iran. All of these things come together, and that's what's driving the Americans, who have backed off from a bad agreement to begin with, the anti-nuclear agreement, and now we're watching what you were talking about before. The Iranians, a couple of days ago, said that they wouldn't raise the tension level. They have significantly raised the tension level now.
Just on that, over the weekend, when this ship was boarded, did that catch the Brits off guard?
I think it did. The destroyer, the frigate they've got down there, was about an hour away. They were obviously watching it by other means, intelligence means. The captain of the frigate was warning the captain of the tanker not to change course, and views have been put in the world media that in fact the Russians may have spoofed his GPS to indicate to him that he was further away from the boundary, whereas he was very close to the boundary, which gave the Iranians the ability to take him. And the Middle East has been a theatre whereby everyone can get involved. And if we think the Russians aren't going to play here, who's the most dependent nation in the world on oil? China. So where this goes is a real challenge for us, and of course we have a special interest in it, and let's see. I suspect there's midnight oil being burnt across the security agencies everywhere at the moment, preparing a list of options for government.
Because it's a real chess piece challenge for governments around the world, for Western-aligned governments like ours, to see what this happens in sort of a security sense. You're right, a nuclear sense, but then just the simple economics of oil and keeping our countries growing. I think I've got some audio there that I want to play. This is the audio that came to light today. Let's have a listen.
You must not impair, impede, obstruct or hamper the passage of the MV Stena Imperio. Please confirm that you are not intending to violate international law by unlawfully attempting to board the MV Stena.
This is good evening, Carol. About in vicinity. If you obey, you will be safe, Captain. After your course 236 degrees immediate.
You can only imagine what's going through the captain's
mind.
Oh,
yes.
You know, Iranian paramilitary troops boarding a ship. It's pretty tough.
It is pretty tough, and we've seen this happen before. We've been through this. We've been through a tanker war in the 80s. This will be a much more sophisticated tanker war. Before President Trump became the president, he made a very famous statement, which was, The world laughs at we Americans who protect ships that we don't own, that aren't carrying oil that we need from a place where we have no friends. And this is still, you know, the Americans have got a big force there. They're not going to back off. The Vice President has said that President Trump will not allow Iran to gain a nuclear weapon. And the Iranians are making as strong rhetorical statements. So I can't see the off-ramp. I think that's the problem.
So 2 quick questions I want to get to. I want to get to foreign fighters because you sat on the committee that dealt with this legislation that will be now debated in the parliament. But just quickly, on the nuclear weapon issue in Iran, Trump did not like the Obama deal because it basically took away all the sanctions. So you went from 0 to 100 in terms of penalty. Having the sanctions meant there was a gradation of the penalties that you could exact against Iraq. The penalties are back in terms of the United States. The rest of the world is still trying to hang on to the Obama deal. Was it a good deal or a bad deal in your view?
I think it was an appalling deal.
And why, Jim?
I think it was a bad deal because it merely kicked the problem down the road.
Yes.
And the biggest issue that I think may be driving the Americans was that within this Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, next year, firstly, billions of Iranian dollars went back to them, which they have spread liberally around in terrorism.
And this goes to your point about Yemen and all the other places that harbour terrorism.
But I think what's driving the Americans at the moment is that under the deal, next year Iran could buy unlimited amounts of conventional weapons. And if the Americans are going to stop Iran from doing it, I suspect, I don't know, I suspect that there's a window of opportunity that in 1 year or 2 years will close, and it would then be very, very hard for America to use its military strength to stop them gaining a nuclear weapon. Now, we can talk about the rights and wrongs of that, but if you were confident you could deter Iran from ever using its nuclear power, and you can't deter North Korea, they're strange people. If you were confident you could deter it, you could let them have nuclear weapons. There's 9 or so countries that have got them, but I wouldn't be confident that you could deter. And the Israelis, of course, opened up those archives and found that the Iranians were well on the way to producing 4 to 5 nuclear weapons.
OK, so let's stay in that same theatre. Let's talk about the Foreign Fighters Bill. How much is it needed in order to sort of mitigate and manage the threat of returning Australian jihadists?
I think it's desperately needed, and I think you and Chris have mentioned the 2 reasons. The first reason is that I think de-radicalisation produces only limited results, very limited results. And the first responsibility that any government has is for the safety of our citizens. Yes, they will be out on the world stage there, but we must protect our citizens.
And just on that, I think you can mount an argument to trial de-radicalisation on a 16-year-old kid punching away on the internet in his house in Mulgrave. I think it's very different when someone has been in the theatre of war for 5 years, literally decapitating people and using, you know, military weapons and becoming so radical they can't see any other way forward for their lives. So
and they understand the techniques of building weapons, building bombs, using weapons where to strike, and that is appalling. The other thing is that we all must understand that we can't just bring these people back and put them into jail, and you mentioned this, our laws don't allow it.
We can't watch them either, Jim, you know that.
Absolutely. You'd need 20 people to watch someone full-time for a 24-hour period.
Yeah, OK. Well, thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you.
All right, that's a real worry, isn't it? That tells you exactly why these laws need to pass a parliament. So I hope Labor is watching and they get their collective act together.